So, without further ado, I give you Dr. Tina Armstrong. And you are on mute, Tina.
As much as I've been teaching on Zoom, you think I would figure that one out by now. But thank you so much, Anton. And I'm so glad to be here to talk about a topic that's very close and dear to my heart, not only as a researcher, as a clinical psychologist, but I would say as a Christian. I think there's a way in which we think about formation and spiritual formation. Sometimes we tend to relegate that towards spiritual practices that we're all common with, like reading sacred texts, prayer, um, meditation, fasting, participating in spiritual community. All those things are important. But equally as important is the development of virtues in our characters as leaders, specifically talking about our emotional development and the forming of our emotional health. Our faith, the Christian faith, calls us to be embodied. If you think about this Holy Week and what this Holy Week represents, we're celebrating a person who came in bodily form. So the body is important. But sometimes when we're doing all the wonderful work that we're doing in a variety of disciplines, we forget that. We forget how important the body is to maintaining not only our vocation, but as a spiritual practice. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about ways that we can all work in terms of developing and forming practices in our lives that not only help for us to be, yes, great citizens and for us to show up, but that are also required of us. If we think about the requirement that God sets forth in Malachi, or you think about even the requirements that are set forth in the New Testament in a variety of ways, specifically, I'm going to go to Malachi 6:8. When you think about that particular verse, there's three main pillars that come up. The first is to do justice. What does that mean to do justice? Well, we'll unpack that in very practical ways today. The second one is to love kindness. That could be also loving kindness. That can also be loving mercy, which is also another symbol of being compassionate. And then the final one is to walk humbly. So there's five pillars that I'm going to talk about today. And I'm actually going to read my little script, because if I don't read my script, because I'm a psychologist and a professor, I'll have you guys here a lot longer than we need to be today. But there's five pillars that I'm going to talk about, are five practices. The first one is that of emotional awareness. And then we're going to move to self-regulation. Then we're going to talk about, let's see, I call it empathy and compassion. That's the third one. The fourth one will be effective communication. And then finally, we'll bring it home with humility. So with each of these that I'm talking about, because I am actually a licensed clinical psychologist, so not just a researcher, not just a professor, but I do clinical practice in my own private practice day to day. So I'm going to invite you, I won't mandate it, but I will invite you to actually practice with me a few tools that can help you strengthen some of these areas. Some of them, like humility and the effective communication, those are a little harder to practice in the time frame that we have, but I'll definitely give you some activities that you can do to help bolster that practice, right? I want you to imagine that all the tools that I'm giving you are as important as some of the other spiritual practices that you engage in. I want you to think about the scriptures, and I might even tie in some of the scripture that really support these practices that we're talking about. One thing that I didn't say, just quick flashback in my bio, Anton did mention it, but I also teach at a seminary. And our psychology program is unique in the fact that we do an integrative program. So our doctoral, our PhD students not only take psychology classes with world-renowned psychologists, but they also take classes in the School of Missions and Theology with theologians. So they're learning these two different disciplines. And then in the School of Psychology, we work on how do you integrate these things? How do you make sense of your faith and the calling of your faith with these practices? And how do you put them together, live them out, but also serve the broader community? So that is the context for which I will be sharing. So Emotional regulation. Let's talk a little bit, or emotional awareness. Emotional awareness is essentially the ability to manage and control one's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, right? If you think about the scripture that says, out of the mouth, the heart speaks. How does your heart speak? First of all, what it's really relying on is that your thoughts, the ways that we think about things, the ways that we hold beliefs about things, really do come and start with how we're thinking. Case in point, I'm at a movie theater, or imagine you're at a movie theater, you see some friends that you know, you say hi, you're waving, but they don't respond. In fact, they turn their backs and begin to have a side conversation. You go in your movie, you do your movie, you're loving it, you have a great time, you come out and you just kind of walk past them because, hey, you felt some kind of way, right? You feel like they snubbed you, but then you realize they didn't even hear you. So initially what happened is you said hi, there was a behavior, you had a thought about the behavior, and then you begin to act on that behavior. So that cognitive triangle just continues to perpetuate itself. So we have to then think about, how do you shift the way that you're thinking about things to be more oriented to being open to not only receiving information, but also checking your biases, your assumptions, and your beliefs. So part of that is a part of that emotional awareness. How aware are you with what's going on inside of you? So, what are some tools to help sharpen that? I would say practicing mindfulness. Now, there's the mindfulness approaches that come from a more Eastern religious school of thought. And then there actually, believe it or not, if you don't know, there are Christian mindfulness practices. The Desert Mothers and Fathers practiced mindfulness. And so there's a way in which some people feel as though they don't want to engage in practices that are outside of their faith. There are practices that you can engage in that are very much founded within the Christian faith. I would also say that becoming emotionally aware also includes you being able to identify your triggers. What does that mean? Triggers are those events or those situations that elicit a really strong emotional response from you. The more you're able to understand, when these things happen, I experience this and I behave this way. Remember that cognitive triangle? Thoughts, actions, behaviors, and feelings, how they all go together. Being able to identify your triggers is another practice within the emotional awareness, as well as practicing self-care, breathing, right? One of the things that happens for us is that when we're not practicing self-care, we get stressed. Stress has a neurobiological impact on our bodies, which then impact us physiological, right? That whole idea of us being in our sympathetic nervous system as opposed to our parasympathetic. So our sympathetic nervous system, that's the fight, flight, freeze, right? You guys all know about that. Saber-toothed tiger's coming. I got to energize myself to get out of here. Either I'm going to try to fight it, I'm going to freeze, or, I'm going to, get away. The part about that is when we're chronically in that state, our bodies are flooded and overwhelmed with cortisol. What does cortisol do? Effectively, it pickles our brains. It is not a sustained welcome component of what makes us healthy. It causes belly fat. It leads to depression. I mean, you can go on and on and on. So parasympathetic nervous system recovery, parasympathetic nervous system, that is the rest and digest. We can manually help our bodies get there by simply breathing. We're going to do that, as I said, a little bit later. I'm going to make sure, we're 5:18. Okay, I'm going to save time for that because we're going to get there. Next, self-regulation. What is self-regulation? So that was emotional awareness. Now we're going to move to managing your self-regulation. So self-regulation is essentially connected to emotional intelligence. It's about your interpersonal relationships. How are you managing your interpersonal relationships? Because we know that when we're not doing well in our interpersonal relationships, how that impacts us. What can we do to strengthen that? Well, the first thing is, if you don't already know what are the key characteristics of emotional intelligence for leadership formation, understand those. Those are so critical. Some people call them soft skills, but we know that those are the real skills. Those are so important in managing our interpersonal relationships, as well as improved communication. So the more that you are aware of what's happening inside of you, the more you can be aware of how you are showing up in the world and how you're responding to others, which then allows you to be more intentional about how you are choosing to engage interpersonally. So the critical part to remember about self-regulation is how you are thinking, feeling, and showing up in the world. Okay, we had emotional awareness, we have self-regulation. Now we're going to move on to empathy and compassion. So just real quick, two things about empathy and compassion that you need to know. The first thing is that empathy is more thinking about you, is more about you being aware of others. How are you imagining being in other shoes, right? Where self-compassion is about you being compassionate towards yourself. A lot of us have this inner critic, right? We want to minimize the inner critic and maximize our inner wisdom. So inner critic is usually identified by that harsh voice, that tone that you would never say to anybody else, right? If someone came to you and said, wow, you know what, Stephanie, I'm having this problem today. You what, Martha, I'm feeling like this today. You'll be like, oh no, it's okay. You're going to be all right. Just hang in there. We're going to get through this. I know that, midterm was hard, but your inner critic, the non-compassionate part of you, like, you know what, you should have done better. What the shouldas, the couldas, you're not good enough, blah, 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 that voice. So we want to shrink that inner critic voice. Think of that inner critic as your bodyguard. The inner critic is really trying to keep you safe and protect you, but how it keeps you safe and protects you is by keeping you doing the same things that you've always done. It doesn't allow you to then transition and build on that repertoire. So we're going to talk about how do you build compassion? How do you not only build self-compassion, but how do you also engage in empathy? We're going to do an activity around that. And let me see, I might actually give you, I'm going to give you the lingo right now, the hand gesture. So if you decide to participate in the little experiment or activity we're going to do today, I'm going to teach you a few things. So when we do self-compassion, what we have found that by actually just try this, just experiment with this for me. Give yourself like this butterfly hug. Give yourself this butterfly hug. Instantly, I see smiles on the screen. I don't know if it's just because Dr. Armstrong has you do some silly stuff. I don't know what it is, but I see smiles. There's something natural that happens when we are calming and protective of ourselves. So this is the butterfly hold. When I say butterfly hold, this is what I'm alluding to. Now I'm going to show you three more. The next one is hands over heart. So you just have your hands like a cross and you can just put them on your heart. Yes. So butterfly, hands on heart, then you have hands on head and hands on heart. Some of us instinctively do this, like when you're like, oh my gosh, right? There's that kind of feeling. So hand on head and heart. And then we're going to leave hand on heart and hand on abdomen. And so you get to choose which one of those compassion holds felt best to you, or simply experiment. But just hold on to those now, and we're going to revisit those in about 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. So again, butterfly, hands on heart, hand on head and heart, hand on heart and belly, and then hands on heart. All right, so those are compassion holds. And these are practices that you can also engage in to help calm that sympathetic nervous system, right? To help you as you're forming emotional continuity and emotional IQ. After that, this next one is not a big surprise. I think most schools, talk about what does it mean to have effective communication. So typically when people think about effective communication, they think things about, okay, using feedback, being open, using I statements, summarizing what the person said. So what I hear you saying, Anton, is blah, 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 right? So that's communicating that you're listening, that you're paying attention, that you're being intentional to hear and not just ready to, spew whatever it is that you want to say, but that you're being open. So yes, all of those things are part of effective communication. But what I want to add is because when we are thinking about the forming of emotionally intelligent leaders, we're also thinking about individuals. So one of the things individually that I want you to think about is, what is your internal dialogue? Your internal dialogue really helps, again, if you think about that cognitive triangle that I talked about, what you're thinking about really shapes how you behave and act within the world around you. That's where those assumptions are, those biases, those beliefs that you hold. Now, I'm not saying all those things are wrong or you need to get rid of them, because all of us hold biases. All of us hopefully have some beliefs that we stand on. But when they remain unchecked, when we don't have a diverse community around us that helps us to become more aware of not only what we think, but other viewing points, that's when things can go a little dangerous, right? When we're in silos and have echoing chambers where we're only hearing and seeing what it is that we want to hear and see. I think that the Bible explicitly talks about the ways in which we need to be in community so that we can avoid those kind of things, so that we can have a variety of opinions. That doesn't mean we have to agree with all those things, but it does mean that we have to at least be aware that they exist and understand where our differentiation points may be. So yes, the thing that I want you to take away from effective communication, that it is all those things that you are normally taught. But I think the unique thing as believers is communication, the internal dialogue. So the communication that we are beginning with ourselves then shapes how we externally communicate with others. So becoming aware of our internal dialogue can help us identify patterns of thinking and change negative thought patterns into more positive and constructive ones. So that is the goal of being formed in that area. How do you shift from patterns that are negative into patterns that really support us and help us? I say that one of the best ways to do that obviously would be therapy, but also another great place to do that is within the context of your community, right? It doesn't mean that you need to have 10 or 15 people, one or two people initially to have those conversations with, that you really feel connected with, where you can really show up as your full self, I think begins the process. And then my final point is that of reclaiming humility. In the Bible, humility is often seen as some positive trait that is valued by God and is necessary for healthy relationships with God and with each other. So what is this humility? But typically when we think about humility, we only think about the aspect of humility that causes us to put others before ourselves. And while, yes, that is an important component of humility, the often overlooked component that I'm submitting to you today, which is something that we can all work on, is acknowledging our limitations. That is part of humility. When we can acknowledge our own limitations, recognizing that our viewpoints may not be the only viewpoints, then the ways in which we engage each other, we can literally hold each other's words, even if we don't necessarily agree or believe, but there's a way in which we can hold their humanity in a way where we see the imago Dei in them, where we just don't see them as this person whose beliefs are so antithetical to mine and is disruptive. And, I'm not saying that there's never a case for that, but I am saying that the majority of cases that we run into are places where we as believers can hold others. But it's difficult. It's challenging. I'm spouting these things, but these things are not necessarily easy to do. They're simple, but not necessarily easy. So in acknowledging our limitations, it really allows us to acknowledge where our weaknesses are and recognizing that in our weakness, that's when God's strength can be made perfect. So not seeing humility as something that is debased and something that is not of value, but something that is of ultimate value within our faith. And as I started this with Malachi, I said Malachi, but it's Micah. Micah 6:8. Um, God requires these things from us for us to flourish in our professions, in our studies, in our personal life, in our families. We're required to do these things. These are things that we often can think about in the context of our faith community, i.e., in your church or your small group or whatever it is that you're doing faith. But what I'm asking you to do is integrate that into your vocation. Integrate that with how you treat people at work. Integrate that with how you treat people at school. Integrate that with how you handle and manage the clients that that you see or that one day you will be representing if you're not already. So with that, I'm going to close this part of our time together. And for a brief 2 minutes, I am going to lead you into what I call settling practices, which are a group of practices that help with Christian formation, but even more so, simply just help with emotional formation of leaders. And so with these settling practices, I invite you to join if you want to. If you don't, that's totally acceptable. And then I encourage you, if they feel right to you, to practice these. These are very practical things that you can engage in to increase your self-regulation, your emotional awareness, compassion, and empathy for others. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is, if you're sitting in a chair, to get comfortable. Comfortable meaning if you can have your lumbar or the back supported, great. Your feet flat on the floor, legs uncrossed, arms just kind of laying on your lap or just uncrossed. And if you like, you can close your eyes. If you want to keep them open, you can. We're simply going to breathe, and I'm going to talk to you while we're breathing. We're going to do a specific type of breath. After we breathe, we're going to do what I call a body scan, where you're going to just kind of go throughout your body and just and imagine and sense where you're feeling tension. After that, we're going to do the compassion holds. All right, so those are the 3 moves that I invite you to join me with today. So if you feel comfortable enough to close your eyes, or if you want to turn off your screen, either way, whatever works, that's good. I'm not monitoring the chat, but if I need to monitor, if there's something on there, Anton, that I need to know, just unmute and let me know. Thank you. All right, so the first thing I ask you to do is just begin to breathe. And I'm going to show you a particular type of breath. It's called belly breathing. Belly breathing, remember I talked about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system? Belly breathing really allows you to move from the fight or flight. You manually get to move your body into this parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest. So you breathe in through your nose as if you're smelling some beautiful aroma. So you hold the breath at the top, and once you feel like you've taken in as much breath as you can, you take in another sip of breath. And then you're going to blow it out as if you're blowing through a straw or blowing out a candle. So in through your nose, holding it, taking another sip, and blowing it out as if blowing through a straw. And you want to get longer and longer with the release of the breath. So inhaling, holding, exhaling. And that's the rhythm. And that rhythm really helps you to center, to become present in your body here and now in this moment. It takes you from the analytical, what are you thinking? Oh, my dinner routine, got to do this, got to go do that, the rabbit trail that we get on in our busy society, and allows you to focus, to be here and now. And as you're continuing to breathe, I want you to think about that rhythm of inhaling, taking in, and releasing. So the rhythm of receiving and releasing, and knowing that as soon as you release, guess what? The next breath is right there waiting for you. Such a life lesson. And as you continue to breathe, the next movement that we'll move into is awareness. So how do you practice becoming aware? One practice is simply by becoming aware and training your mind to become aware of what's going on inside of your body. So we're going to do a body scan. So I want you to think as you're closing your eyes, you're thinking from the bottom of your toes to the top of your head. And as you work through each particular body part, I want you to notice any particular areas where you feel tightness or tiredness or stuckness or pain or tenderness, or you get to name the feeling. But I want you to center in on some area where you feel some uncomfortability. And as you're working your way up from your toes to your shins, to your knees, to your quads, um, to your hamstrings, up to your hips and your abdomen, up to your chest, up to your shoulders, then your arms and your wrists and your hands and your fingertips, and then back up to your neck and your chin and your lips and your jaws and your nose and your eyes and ears and forehead. And then finally, we're at the top of your head. Now, hopefully, somewhere in there, you have discerned or discovered there's some feeling that you have. Say, for example, if it's your right shoulder blade, what I want you to do is imagine that breath, and hopefully you're continuing to breathe. When you exhale that breath, I want you to imagine yourself sending that breath to that particular place in your body. No judgment. You're simply sending your breath there. And after you send your breath there, the next move is going to be for you to imagine sending self-compassion there. How do we do that? We start with a compassion hold. So again, whatever compassion hold you have decided that you want to do today, I invite you to engage in that compassion hold in this moment. And as you're engaging in that compassion hold, I want you to continue with the movement of breath. And I want you to continue to allow self-compassion to radiate not only in that area that you've identified some particular feeling around, but I want you to allow it then to begin to radiate throughout your whole body. Self-compassion, kindness, gentleness, and love. And as you do that, I invite you to slowly come back to the room. And what I mean by that is you can open your eyes, you can turn your monitors on, and that will end our practice for today.